A man walks into a tavern. He's got white hair, yellow eyes like a cat, and 2 swords on his back. The music stops. Conversations die. A mother pulls her child closer. The innkeeper's hand drifts toward something under the counter. And the man? He's used to it. He's been getting this reaction for over a century. He just wants a bed, maybe some bread, and to not kill anything tonight. But everyone in that room is looking at him like he's the monster. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. Part of them wishes they were him. Part of them looks at those inhuman eyes and thinks about what it would feel like to never grow old, to be strong enough to kill anything, to walk through the world untouchable. They hate him, they fear him, and somewhere deep in their gut, they envy him too. This is the tragedy of the Witcher. We think we know what a Witcher is. We've played the games, watched the show, maybe read the books. We know the silver sword is for monsters. The steel one is for humans. We know the mutations, the signs, the alchemy. But what we don't talk about is the psychological horror of being made into something humanity needs but refuses to accept. We don't talk about what it does to a child when you strip away his ability to feel, then send him out into a world that will hate him for existing. The Witchers aren't just fantasy characters. They're a mirror held up to every society that creates warriors, then discard them. Every culture that demands protectors, then treats them as pariahs. Every system that takes children and breaks them into weapons, then acts surprised when those weapons don't fit back into normal life. The world of the continent needed Witchers. That's the part everyone forgets. Before the trials, before Kaer Morhen, before the mutations, there were just monsters. Everywhere. Griffins nesting in mountain passes. Drowners pulling farmers into rivers. Striga tearing through castle halls at night. Humanity was prey, and no army could stop it because armies are built to fight other armies. They march in formation. They hold shields, they follow orders. None of that works when a foglet can turn invisible and rip out your throat, or when a Bruxa moves faster than your eyes can track. Humanity needed specialists. They needed men who could see in the dark, who could sense magic, who could take a hit that would kill any normal soldier and keep fighting. They needed monsters of their own, and so they made them. The mages who created the first Witchers understood something brutal about human nature. If you want someone to fight monsters their entire life, you can't just train them. Training breaks down. Motivation fades. Fear takes over. You have to change what they are at the most fundamental level. You have to take a child because adults won't survive the process, and you have to rebuild them from the inside out. The trial of the grasses is described in clinical terms in the books. Alchemical compounds, mutagenic herbs, controlled poisoning over days. What it actually was, what it felt like, was a child strapped to a table, screaming until his voice gave out, while his own blood turned against him, his bones breaking and reforming, his eyes burning from the inside, his heart stopping, restarting, stopping again. 3 out of 10 survived, sometimes fewer. The boys who walked into that chamber were sons, brothers, children with names and memories and dreams. The ones who walked out, if they walked out, weren't entirely human anymore. And here's where the envy starts. Because the survivors got something extraordinary. Reflexes that border on precognition. Lifespans measured in centuries. Immunity to disease. The ability to brew potions that would kill any normal man but grant temporary powers beyond imagination. They got strength, speed, and senses that made them the apex predators of their world. They got to walk into any fight knowing that almost nothing could actually kill them. From the outside, from the perspective of a farmer watching his children die of plague, or a soldier knowing his entire unit could be wiped out by a single monster, or a nobleman growing old and weak while his enemies circle. A Witcher looks like something close to a god. He doesn't age. He doesn't get sick. He doesn't lose. He walks through the world as if death itself decided to look the other way. Who wouldn't want that? But nobody sees what's underneath. Nobody sees a Witcher alone at night, unable to sleep, because his enhanced hearing picks up every heartbeat, every breath, every mouse on the walls. Nobody sees him trying to remember what food tasted like before the mutations flattened his sense of taste to mere fuel identification. Nobody sees him watching normal people laugh, love, grieve, and wondering if those feelings he still has are real emotions or just echoes, habits left over from being human. The great lie about witchers is that they can't feel. The truth is far worse. They feel everything. They're just trained from childhood to never show it. Because showing weakness on the path gets you killed. And witchers die alone. The common folk who fear them don't understand this. They see a man with cat eyes and assume he's incapable of love. They see someone who kills for money and assume he enjoys it. They see mutations and think freak. They don't see the 7-year-old who was sold by his parents for a few coins. They don't see the teenager who watched his brothers die screaming on tables beside him. They don't see the century-old warrior who still remembers his mother's face but hasn't spoken to another person in months who wasn't either hiring him or trying to kill him. To the world, witchers are tools. Dangerous tools. You use them when you need them, then you lock them away. And if they break, if they die, you don't mourn. You just note that there's one less monster killer available. Geralt of Rivia became famous because he refused to accept this arrangement. He kept making choices. He kept having opinions. He kept treating people like they mattered, even when they treated him like a thing. And the world couldn't stand it. A witcher who saves a Striga instead of killing her? Unnatural. A witcher who falls in love? Impossible. A witcher who raises a child, protects the innocent, makes friends? That's not what you're for. You're for killing and dying and being forgotten. How dare you want more? The hatred directed at Geralt throughout the stories isn't really about what he is. It's about what he refuses to be. He refuses to be the emotionless weapon they paid for. He refuses to disappear between jobs. He refuses to die quietly when the world decides it doesn't need him anymore. And yet, the envy persists. Because for all their hatred, humans can't stop imagining themselves with those powers. Every young boy who sees a witcher fight thinks about what he could do with that speed. Every aging king thinks about what he'd give for that lifespan. Every person who's ever felt powerless, vulnerable, afraid, looks at a witcher and sees the opposite of everything they are. The fantasy isn't about the killing. It's about the control. Witchers control their own bodies, their own survival, their own fate in ways that normal humans never can. They walk into danger because they choose to. They walk away because they can. In a world where most people are born, suffer, and die at the mercy of forces they can't even see, a witcher seems like the one person who actually gets to decide. What they don't understand is that witchers didn't choose anything. Geralt didn't apply for the job. He was given away, traded, abandoned by the human world before he was old enough to understand what he was losing. The trials didn't ask for his consent. The mutations didn't care about his dreams. Everything that makes him powerful was forced on him, and everything it cost him was taken without permission. The freedom everyone envies is built on a foundation of absolute powerlessness. He walks through the world unchained because chains were forged into his very blood. He fears nothing because fear was beaten out of him before he knew what it was. He lives for centuries because he was robbed of the chance to live a normal lifetime. The schools understood this. Kaer Morhen, the Cat School, the Griffin School, all the others. They took children because children could be broken and rebuilt. They kept them isolated because isolation prevents attachment. They trained them in philosophy, in emotional suppression, in the lie that they were above humanity. Because if a witcher ever fully grasped what had been stolen from him, he might stop fighting monsters and start fighting the people who made him one. The neutral code, the prohibition against taking sides in human conflicts, all of it is designed to keep witchers useful and controlled. Stay out of politics. Don't form attachments. Don't ask questions. Just take the coin and do the job. And humanity played its part perfectly. When monsters were common, witchers were tolerated, grudgingly, always at arm's length. When monsters grew rare, when the great threats were hunted to extinction, when the continent became safer, suddenly witchers weren't necessary anymore. Suddenly those inhuman eyes weren't useful, just disturbing. Suddenly those supernatural abilities weren't protection, just threat. Kaer Morhen was sacked not by monsters, but by humans. A mob driven by fear and disgust, funded by mages who saw witchers as competition, stormed the fortress and slaughtered almost everyone inside. They killed the teachers. They killed the students. They destroyed the mutagens, so no new witchers could ever be made. And they called it progress. They called it safety. They called it removing a monster from the world. The surviving witchers scattered. The schools collapsed or went underground. And the Great Witcher Genocide was barely even recorded in history, because who mourns the death of tools? Who writes elegies for weapons? The humans who lived through that era congratulated themselves on making the world safer. Their children grew up in a world without witchers, and they thought that was natural. They thought the monsters were just gone. They didn't understand that every dark forest path they walked safely. Every night they slept without a striga breaking through their window. Every child who lived to adulthood without being dragged into a swamp was bought with witcher blood. The handful who remained, Geralt and his brothers, the scattered few from other schools, became ghosts. They walked roads that didn't want them, served villages that despised them, and watched the world forget everything they sacrificed. Occasionally someone would hire them for a job too dangerous for anyone else. Occasionally someone would remember that there are still monsters out there. But mostly they were relics, reminders of an uglier time that humanity preferred not to think about. And they aged slowly, watching everyone they knew grow old and die while they remained trapped in bodies that wouldn't release them. This is what envy looks like when you see it clearly, not immortality, but watching your friend's grandchildren put flowers on graves while you remain exactly the same. Not power, but being strong enough to save everyone except the ones who matter. Not freedom, but being so alone that the concept of belonging stops making sense. The peasant who watches a witcher ride by and thinks about that strength, that lifespan, that supernatural ability, is seeing a commercial for something he'll never have to pay for. The price isn't listed. The cost isn't visible. But it's there in those yellow eyes that can't quite meet anyone else's. It's there in that voice that's forgotten how to ask for help. It's there in that room at the inn where a man sits alone while the whole tavern stays as far away as possible. Gerald's story, the one we follow through games and books and shows, matters because he fought against this. Not against the monster, that part was easy. Against the isolation. Against the lie that he couldn't love because his heart beat differently. Against the assumption that being made into a weapon meant he had to act like one. Every time he chose to help someone for free, every time he made a friend instead of a client, every time he let himself feel something for Yennefer or care about Ciri's future, he was proving that the thing they tried to kill in those trials, the humanity, the capacity for connection, doesn't die that easily. But he's the exception. The other witchers, the ones whose names we barely know, they accepted the bargain. They did the jobs, took the coins, and faded away. They let humanity use them up because that's what they were made for. And somewhere in the anonymous graves that did the continent, in the unmarked endings of century-long lives, there's a truth that the fearful villagers and the envious dreamers never had to face. The Witcher isn't the monster. The system that makes him is. The world that needs him and hates him is. The society that would rather create mutant orphans than deal with its own problems is. In the end, the fear and the envy are two sides of the same misunderstanding. People fear witchers because they don't look human. People envy witchers because they don't seem bound by human limits. But both reactions miss the point. Witchers are more human than anyone wants to admit. They're what happens when you take human children and force them to survive things that should be impossible. The yellow eyes, the white hair, the supernatural abilities, those are scars. Marks of trauma written in flesh and bone. The envy is for wounds. The fear is of victims. And the tragedy is that humanity never figured out how to just say, thank you. Thank you for the monsters you killed. Thank you for the centuries you gave. Thank you for being the thing we needed you to be. Even though we never treated you like a person. The last witchers are dying now. Not in glorious battle, not in honored retirement, but quietly, alone, on roads that lead nowhere, in service to people who won't remember their names. And when they're gone, when the last yellow eyes close forever, humanity will tell itself a story. They'll say witchers were dangerous, unnatural, better gone. They'll say the world is safer without them. They'll forget the children who were sacrificed, the brothers who watched each other die on stone tables, the centuries of service rewarded with contempt. And maybe centuries from now, when something crawls out of the dark and there's no one left who knows how to stop it, they'll remember. They'll look for a man with white hair and cat eyes, and no one will answer. Because you can't destroy someone completely and then expect them to save you. You can't spend centuries teaching a man that he's less than human and then be surprised when the last of his kind doesn't feel obligated to protect humanity anymore. Fear and envy. That's all they ever offered. And in the end, that's all they'll have left.